I want sustainability, and I'm looking forward to like a really big transition for our people, because right now the work that I'm doing, I'm also encouraging and building more young leaders out there. And so I've been, reaching out and building more networks with young people and, creating.
They are warriors. They're strong, resilient, and determined to make a difference in the world. They come from different cultures and walks of life, but they all share a common purpose: to uplift and empower their communities. Welcome to Meet the Anutin-Kewak, a podcast where we sit down with Indigenous people who are making a positive impact in their communities and beyond. From activists and artists to entrepreneurs and community leaders, these warriors share their wisdom, their experience, and their perspectives on a wide range of topics. Join me as I dive into the diverse and inspiring stories of these remarkable individuals and learn about the challenges they face and the lessons they learned along the way. In this episode, our guest is Hailey Rose. She's a trauma survivor and a mental health advocate from Mosquito, Grizzly Bear's Head, Lean Man, and Red Pheasant First Nation in Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territory in Canada. She's currently an Indigenous Studies major at the University of Saskatchewan, and she holds several leadership positions, including the Female Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and the Assembly of First Nations National Youth Co-Chair. And she's also part of Neo Wellness. Hailey is dedicated to empowering and uplifting youth, promoting holistic wellness, and advocating for mental health. Awesome, Hailey. I'm just glad to get you on. I've been thinking about this for a while now, and ever since I came up with this podcast and came up with the name, I'm like, oh yeah, she'll be a great guest. So really happy to have you here, and I'm just excited for this conversation.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure of mine to be here with you too.
Oh, it's deadly. Well, we'll kick it off. Let's just tell us a bit about yourself and a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 territory. I'm a registered member in Mosquito, Grizzly Bear Head, Lean Man First Nation, and that's from my biological father's side. And then my mom is from Red Pheasant, so I have some family ties there. And I'm currently living in Whitecap, Dakota First Nation. And it's actually my first time living on a reservation. And so it's a really big, it's a new thing to me, living on a reserve, being born and raised in a city my whole life. That's all I knew. I was an urban res child growing up. So I'm really liking it. I was living in Saskatoon because I'm currently in university. Hey, I'm in my second year. I'm studying Indigenous studies, and it's been really exciting, especially studying Indigenous studies while I'm doing my leadership work in politics and maintaining my roles as FSIN youth representative and the Assembly First Nations National Youth Co-Chair, and then also doing some business. So out here in Whitecap, this is actually our headquarters. And so we maintain all of our work here for Neo Wellness. And so got a lot going on, but always trying to do my best for the young people and, a healing path forward.
Wow, that does sound like a lot. That's a lot for a young lady. Man, when I was I sound real old now. When I was your age, I was like just worried about what my next where my next beer was coming from. But that's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that from you. With all that being said, what was life like growing up? Like, what was it like in North Battleford?
Mm-hmm. Man, well, there's a really big stigma behind North Battleford. A lot of people refer to it as Crime Town.
Tell me about it. I'm from Meadow Lake. Same thing.
And, it's tough. It was tough being, identifying as an Indigenous woman in North Battleford because there was a lot of racism in that city. And, there was a couple issues that even happened, growing up in North Battleford, the things with, the Bushy case and whatnot. And so I faced some challenges there But I had a really good family. I have a really good family. Me and my mom all the time. Me and her are just real close. And, she supported me through everything, when I was doing my podcast things, when I was going to school and, trying to maintain everything that I was trying to. But, before that, growing up, I experienced a lot of mental health challenges. And I think that was because there wasn't a lot of opportunity in North Battleford. And so there wasn't a lot of things for our young people to do. And so we didn't have access to different arcades or, all these different things that bigger cities have. And so it was really difficult to keep myself busy, stay out of trouble. And so sometimes the only option was to get in trouble. How do we have fun? We're going to drive and, have fun, have a good time when we drive all the time and, do some reckless things in that city. But I think what really, made North Battleford home was family. And, that's where my family grew up and that's where my family is still to this day. And I really wanted to make the most out of that city. When I started to experience depression and things like anxiety and insomnia, a lot of that happened before the pandemic, and we were facing a lot of mental health struggles in our community, and a lot of our young people had suicide struggles too, and so those challenges affected me too because I lost somebody who meant a lot to me. Hey. And for me, it took a really hard hit on me. And I didn't have the access to some really good supports at that time, resources, because it wasn't a conversation that a lot of people had. Hey, a lot of people didn't know how to cope with mental health. And so sometimes the only way that I knew how to cope with, these mental health challenges, obstacles that I was facing was, to go to the drugs or, to go to the alcohol and, to party with your friends. And that was normal. That was a normal thing for our young people to do, especially when we didn't have access to other things that could keep us out of those environments. And but as I got older, I think I started to realize that, if there wasn't this opportunity in this city, then I want to see what's out there, what's beyond, North Battleford. And it's funny because I remember scrolling through Facebook. I was scrolling through Facebook and this opportunity came up, and it was like there was this conference happening in Ottawa. And I was reading up on it, and it said that you had to apply and make this really long essay and do a video introduction. And I was like, this is my way to just get away for a little while, And I was in a place of hurt at that time. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wasn't doing too well in school, hey. And I always knew that I was really smart and that I was capable, but because of the things that I was experiencing, it made it difficult. It made it difficult for me to have that drive to go to school, to do my work, to focus, and to have good relationships, even with my friends and with my teachers, and even in that school. Hey, so I remember filling out that application. And it was saying it was asking me these questions who are you, and what do you like to do, what are the things that you've done in your community, what are the things that youth are facing right now that have been preventing you from succeeding. And man, I remember going through all those papers and just telling my story. And I asked my mom, I said, Mom, what do I write about in this application? And my mom's a really good writer. I can always rely on her. She just, she's academically all there. And I remember asking her, and she's like, you know what, Hailey, it's always important to speak from the heart. Be yourself, and you don't want to portray as someone you're not, because that's not you. And people are going to see that. people will see that about you. They'll recognize it right away, and people want to know who you are, you know. And when I went, I ended up getting accepted to go to this conference, and I ended up going to Ottawa, and it was with the Assembly of First Nations, and so it was a really big thing, a really big opportunity, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm here. And we ended up creating 5 calls to action, and it was towards our education system and how we could implement good solutions so that our indigenous young people could have a good education, so that we could see and help our young people succeed in high school, in university, in college, and in trades. And I remember just sitting there like, holy smokes, like I'm really doing this, you know? And I always wanted a change. I always wanted something that was going to get me somewhere else, you know, somewhere else that I needed to be. I didn't know where I needed to be. I didn't know my purpose at that time. I didn't know what my goals were. I didn't know what my dreams were. And I remember sitting in this room at the end of the one night there in Ottawa, and there was this elder, and she asked me, you know, who are you, Hailey? And I was like, I'm Hailey. And then she goes, well, what do you do? And it's like, I don't know what I do. I go to school, and then when I go home, I sleep. And it really made me think. And we did some really good work there, and I ended up being able to speak at that conference. And it was in a really, really like significant, like big place where a lot of MPs were. You know, there was a lot of chiefs in the room, and the federal government was even there to listen to our young people. And that's where the beginning of my political leadership journey actually began, because I realized that I was actually creating change and sustainability for our people, for our young people, for our younger generations, to do good, you know, and to help them, and bring awareness to these issues that is a reality in our communities, things like suicide, you know, things like the mental health, things like our education systems were failing us, our justice systems were failing us back home, our healthcare, you know, there's so many things going on with healthcare right now. And what really stuck with me was people were listening to me. And I think that's what was my calling. I needed that. I needed somebody to just listen to me, you know, look me in the eyes and be present in the moment with me, and not be thinking about all this other stuff, not worrying about all this other stuff. Just, Hailey, what do you need? You know, what do you think you need? And in that moment, I felt, you know, heard. I felt like I mattered. And it was like, this is what all of these young people want. You know, and we wonder why our young people get into trouble sometimes. And sometimes it comes because they need that attention. They want that attention, or sometimes they don't have that, and they feel like nobody's, you know, listening to them, nobody's giving them that space to just speak. And so that's what really like kind of sparked this and ignited this flame in me, you know, to continue doing this work. And from there, it kind of took me and gave me more opportunities in those spaces. And already I had a really good connection with the Assembly of First Nations and some of the people that work there. And yeah, that's basically, you know, where my leadership kind of began, and here I am.
Holy man, that's awesome. Here I had a bunch of questions to ask you about FSIN and assembly, and you kind of cracked off every one of those. It's awesome. It's pretty deadly when you get to talk to somebody, hey, and they just give you their attention, and they're listening, and they're not waiting for their
Mm-hmm.
chance to give you an answer or try to tell you how to fix your problems or fix anything about you. They're just listening and taking it in. It's pretty special. I'm glad you got to experience that, and I get to experience it now. I mean, so many people don't even get that in their lifetime. At least you got to experience it now and know what it's like, and be able to take that forward, and really lead the charge with a lot of these youth. It's pretty special, pretty special watching you from what you're doing, and being able to being able to see like that there is people out there doing what you're doing. That's probably the
Mm-hmm.
biggest one for me, because it gives a lot of hope, right? It gives a lot of hope to people, especially a lot of people that are in isolated communities or anywhere, right? It doesn't really matter, but just that there is things out there. There's opportunity out there if you take that risk, take that chance, and really once you're there, it's like it's 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 freeing, right? It feels from the outside, it looks like, oh my God, there's so much pressure, so much to do. I can't believe she's doing all this. But when you're doing it, you're like, what's next? What's next? This is fun. I'm loving this. On top of obviously there's pressure and different nerves and different things, but it's pretty cool to see. I I did have one question, especially from the female point of view, because I talk to a lot of guys. I'm in a lot of man space, we'll call it. I do a lot of even coaching and things. There's a lot of like men coaching and relationship side of things, and I'm usually talking to the husband. But especially with Indigenous women, like even on the FSIN level, like what's like the big issues facing a lot of those females in those that you see anyway right now?
Yeah, I think for myself, I think a lot of people forget how young I am. Hey, I'm only 19 years old, and sometimes I need to remember that myself because I can put so much pressure on me for some of the things that I face every day or I see every day, and I'm like, man, this is crazy. Like I feel so young in this space, but I also know that I've been placed here for a reason. And, I was elected, by young people, from the 74 First Nations in Saskatchewan that rely on me, people that want me to guide them. And for me, it wasn't about really leading people. Hey, like I don't want to lead the people. I want to guide you. And I think um, for myself, there's always this vision that our leaders are there to rule. Hey, and that's something that can be um, so difficult, to think about because that didn't come from our people to think that way that we rule. And sometimes it becomes difficult because even though I'm in this position, I'm still exactly where everyone else is. I'm still, just a regular person. And so sometimes it's hard being in this position because a lot of people do rely on you. But sometimes, you still have your regular life. You're still dealing with, normal issues that everyone faces, right? And sometimes I'm not given the opportunity to share those things. And so sometimes it's hard for me to be vulnerable and it's hard for me to express the way that I'm feeling and talk about the hardships that I'm going through and talk about, the things I've even experienced in my past. And so when I was younger, I experienced something that was like really traumatic and something that kind of like, really led me here to do the work that I do. And I always believe that, the teachers out there, the ones that are leading, come from a lot of knowledge, come from a lot of experience and things that they've actually, you know, persevered through in their life. And um, when I went through that traumatic, situation when I was young, as a trauma survivor myself, it really opened my eyes to, how much I conquered through and how much I had to believe in myself to do that work internally. And especially for our women, even in these leadership roles, we can face a lot of lateral violence. And we can face a lot of lateral violence even from our own people, even from the people that, our relations, you know, that kinship. And lately I've been, you know, really thinking about, you know, how our traditional governance systems work, because they've changed dramatically, you know, with chief and council, um, that was brought by the white man, you know, to have somebody who's more superior on top leading and guiding everyone. But if we take that back, if we take it back to our traditional governing systems, you'll see that we didn't have these chief and councils. We didn't have that. We had tribal chiefs. We had clan chiefs. And so your name title as a person, right from when you were born, you already had a responsibility. You already had a right. You already had a duty. So when you were born, whether you were an older brother already and you had siblings on the way, or maybe you were born into a family of medicine, or you were born into the family of war, or you were born into the family of political affairs, that was already something that was in your bloodline, a part of your clan. And it's something that's really like powerful, because sometimes, you know, the violence that comes from, um, the outside, you know, externally, but internally too, um, we've dismissed and forgotten that we as Indigenous people had these practices way before time that brought us together, always equally as one. And that's what made us so strong, is because one was never on top of the other. It wasn't based on all of, you know, like, how do I explain it? It wasn't based on, being elected in. You weren't elected in, and people weren't to vote you in. You were in that place of power because you held great knowledge, whether that was political affairs, or with medicine, or with, you know, all those different, as we call it, portfolios now. Hey, we call it portfolios. But back then, that's how it was. And so I think it's created like a really big gap. And I think we've, you know, even forgotten, you know, how important it is to bring it back to those traditional governing ways. And I think that's a good way as how we can, you know, prevent, the backlash that happens, you know, being in those positions and working with other people out there when it comes to the federal government or the provincial government, or even, you know, our own institutions or organizations. And, you know, being a young person, in this position, I know that a lot of our older leaders, a lot of our more recognized leaders, sometimes we can underlook us, right? Because we're young, you know, we're young people, and we're the children. And sometimes it does go unnoticed, you know, sometimes the work, but, um, it doesn't it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be at those tables making those decisions, because the decisions that are being made are going to affect us. You know, they're going to affect our generations. And so it's important that we talk about these things with our education and our justice and our healthcare, and bring and uplift our women in these positions. And when you talk about those traditional governing systems too, a lot of the women, led the way, because our women were the life givers. Our women had a lot of power um, because of who they were, and they provided life. You know, they could bleed for days on end, and they wouldn't die. You know, and that's what gave them so much strength. That's what gave our women so much power. And they were the hunters, and they were the gatherers, and they were the protectors. Because, you know, when a mom's mad in the house, everyone feels it in the house. Everyone knows something's wrong.
That's a scary, scary deal. Yeah.
um, but there's a lot, that our young people are facing right now. But I think coming out of this pandemic, it really is, you know, our mental health. It is things like racism. It always draws it back to that, you know, not feeling welcomed in spaces that aren't made for us. You know, spaces that can be very colonial. A lot of these, um, a lot of these spaces aren't welcoming for our young people because it's still very limiting, hey, like to what we can do, what we can bring, because those opportunities aren't there sometimes. And so these are things that like I always talk about, um, even in when it comes to decision making. It's like we have to remember that our young people are going to be the leaders, in those positions one day, making those decisions. And so it's important that we mentor them and we guide them and we make a trail for them to walk on.
Yeah. Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
it's crazy. I was gonna ask you actually, like, what does a sovereign nation look like to you? But you just explained exactly what that was. And you touched on it a little bit, and I want to kind of dig into a little more about like I was talking with some colleagues this morning about it, and we call it IK, or Indigenous knowledge, right? To a lot of the projects that we work with, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of environmental stuff that we do at work or with our consulting, and there is a lot of Indigenous knowledge in that. Typically we got to go seek out the elders for that knowledge. But do you
Mm-hmm.
see any of it like in your travels and with a lot of those conferences that you go to, like that knowledge being passed down to the youth? Or if that is getting passed down, like how is it getting passed down? Do you see any of that? Or is it kind of dying right now? That's what I see. I don't see much of it being passed on because I mean, it's always romantic to think like, oh yeah, go have this even or afternoon with an elder, right? But everything else, life gets in the way, and it just goes by the wayside. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that, if you see the knowledge being passed on.
I think a lot of our indigenous knowledge comes from ceremony. And for myself, when I'm learning about these practices of our people, about our values, about, our ways of life, the why everything is why everything was made the way that it is. It comes from ceremony. When it comes from sweats, it'll come from sun dances, and that's a place even too where a lot of those conversations are given. That's where a lot of those conversations come from, where you learn those practices. And even in university or high school, you think that a lot of that knowledge could come, even just from the education curriculums. But I think sometimes the pressure can always be put on our young people too, hey? That, we don't give them that knowledge. We don't pass down these teachings. It's also for us, to reach out, to go to the elders, to go to our knowledge keepers, ask our mothers and ask our fathers. But something that really prevents us, and I was talking to my grandma about this as well, as to, I want to know more about like who I am, our identity, about our culture, and about our ways of life as Nehewak. And for our older people out there, they still have a lot of guilt and a lot of shame attached to, all the traumatic things that happened to them, the things like 60s Scoop and Indian Act and, all those residential schools, all those things made them feel like they couldn't talk about those things. They couldn't share that. They couldn't share the language. They couldn't pass that down. And so that's why we lost that. And so when I asked my grandma this, I was asking my grandma, like, I wondered too, like, why don't I know my language, Because my grandma's fluent, hey? Like, my grandma can speak it. And um, I had to make her feel comfortable. I had to provide her with a space that made her feel open to sharing, those important teachings. And I think that's what we all have to recognize. We all have to recognize that, if you've experienced so much traumatizing things in your life, it becomes difficult to pass that down because you don't know any better. You've been taught, not to pass that down. And the other couple weeks ago, I sent my grandma a song. I was singing a song, and it's the first song that I've actually learned in Cree. And it goes, Gakio ekote totitan, and it goes, Gabit, or I forget how it goes right now, but I sang this song, hey, and I sent it to my grandma, and my grandma called me within a minute. She goes, Hailey, send me that video right now again. I knew what you were saying. And she's like, Hailey, I want to cry. I want to cry. And I said, why, grandma? And I wanted to cry, like seeing, for our young people, like it is really tough seeing older people cry, like even a mother, even a father, you're not something that you're used to. And so when she said that, she's like, wow, Hailey, she's like, to hear you singing, especially in the language, in your language, she's like, that's so inspiring, Hailey. And I could hear it in her voice. It was like, wow, I have hope. I have hope. And suddenly after that, after I had sent her that song, she's been talking to me about these different teachings, talking to me more about like spirituality. And there was always spirituality in my family, but it was a little bit more it wasn't as near to culture. It was more spirituality stuff like Reiki and grounding yourself. Um, but I always put that pressure, I was always like, why wouldn't, my grandma pass down those teachings? But I realized that we had to make that space for them to be vulnerable and to remind them that it's okay. It's okay to pass down those teachings. And that guilt and that shame that's attached to that trauma is not their fault. And it's not anyone's fault why these practices and this knowledge hasn't been taught to our younger generations. That didn't come from us. And so when it comes to Indigenous knowledge too, it is a big thing to, reach out to other people. But yeah, I think like for younger people, it's easiest to do that through education, because that's the only way to like be educated, is to go to school, like, and learn. And so it's harder, for urban native kids for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I echo that sentiment. Every single person I've talked to has said the same thing about ceremony. Everything goes back to ceremony and getting in touch with ceremony. Even talking with Chester Knight, and he was with alcoholism. He that had a huge grip on him, and same thing. It just took some sweats, took a lot of ceremony to start realizing, start opening that and cracking that open. And so many people I talk to about Sundance, everything is always ceremony. And I'm very fortunate too now with the line of work that I do, and being able to consult with so many people and being able to talk to so many people. Like everywhere I travel, my backpack's full of tobacco. So I'm always offering and listening and really learning how to listen. I think that's probably the biggest thing, which worked for a lot of ways. I need to learn to listen for my relationship, for one, with my wife. But now being able to carry that over to being able to listen to stories and listen to elders, not just elders, like listen to leadership, listen to young people, listen to anybody, but just to take it in and really try to understand it, and not again come back with like an answer or a fix. I mean, most people bring me in to fix things, but I mean, just to take it in for a while and then I can work on the fix, but not have to solve everything right away, right? And listen. So it's been a real experience for me in that same sentiment of just taking it all in and really paying attention. But again, that takes time, and it took a lot of effort on my end too. I always thought the same thing of like, well, no one taught me that, or no one's teaching me anything. But it's like, wow, it takes effort on both sides. You have to reach out as well, and be open to those teachings. So yeah, no, it's pretty deadly hearing you talk about that. The other thing, and we mentioned, you were talking about it quite a bit, like just with education and youth. I'm really big, especially with work, with trying to capacity build in any way I can in a lot of these communities that I'm in. And it's tough. It really is. There's a lot of issues facing that. But you're in school right now, like you're in university, and trying to get more youth, especially Indigenous youth, into STEM fields, like anything with that, right? Like science, technology, engineering, That's kind of where I'm living in that engineering world, which it's very, very rare to have that. And in the medical field, like, again, most people I talk to, like any smart Indian, they go for their law degree, right? It's like we have enough smart Indian lawyers. We need more Indian doctors. We need more Indian engineers. We need all these things, right? Like, what do you see at the university level um, on that? Like, is there much progression in that way, or is there still a lot of work that needs to be get done at the grassroots level?
Well, I'm very fortunate when it comes to education. I went and applied for university even before I graduated, and um, I went in thinking that I wanted to do political science, and soon enough I realized that it was going to be Indigenous studies. I was going to switch this up real quick. Um, but when I attended my first class, it was online because I was a COVID student, hey? And I didn't get the university feel my first year. And so stepping into my second year this past fall term, um, I remember walking in with my backpack and, feeling good. And I was like, oh, university life is
Got my
here. I'm
school clothes.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I put on my town clothes today. And I remember just being so like excited, and I was still in politics. I had a lot of my polls classes, and I remember walking into that room, and I actually had a lot of Indigenous like earrings on. I had my Indigenous earrings on, and I had my hat that said Big Anti Energy. And so it was pretty clear, that I'm Indigenous, I'm Native, and, my backpack just has this big like feather on it, like that says Big Anti Energy, like I'm putting it out there. And I remember walking into that classroom and everyone was just looking at me, like really staring at me, and I was like, okay, and I just stuck it out and I kept my head held high, and I was sitting in that classroom just, sitting there quietly, and um, right off the bat, I was kind of like I was watching the prof. Hey, I wanted to see if he was gonna do an acknowledgement. Hey, because usually they do that first day class, and there was no acknowledgement to the territorial lands, or to the people that walk this treaty. Um, and I was like, okay, okay. And I was the only Indigenous woman in that class. And already there, I was like, oh, I'm in for a long ride here. And so instantly, I kind of felt like a little out of place, because there was a lack of representation. I didn't see a lot of similar faces that kind of look like mine, um, and I know that that can be difficult, for Indigenous people to step into those spaces, um, and not see, other natives in the classroom. And I remember like coming out and I was like, well, what is there, for the Indigenous community? Because there's a lot of Indigenous students here. I know there is. And I walked into the Gordon Oaks Center, and it was a really beautiful facility, and it was for the Indige folks. And I was kind of like wondering, like, what do they have here to like that's accessible for our first years or second years? Like, is there any like events that can kind of bring us together? Because I'm really trying to find my community here. And for me, that's really important. Hey, that's what drives us. That's what motivates us to stay there. Because I knew if I didn't really feel welcomed, hey, if I didn't feel welcomed at the university, it was going to be really hard for me to stay there. And there was nothing really that I could find. And I was like, oh boy. I was like, I can't believe that. But I didn't know at the time that the pandemic kind of, stopped everything for all of that. They couldn't uphold and continue these councils that they had, and a lot of them, just discontinued. And I was lucky enough to make, a few friends there, at that Gordon Oaks Center, and I found myself realizing that they needed more opportunities for our young people to feel motivated to go to university and to continue with their education and do good. And I got that ISU. There's this Indigenous Students Union. I got it started again, and that felt really good because I knew that if we started this council again, it was going to bring our people together, and they were going to feel welcome there, and they were going to, have some relations. They were going to feel like they had a space that was safe for them. And I am very grateful too because, I had some connections to the vice dean at the university. And these are things that we do talk about too, about having more representation at the school, having more Indigenous folks take up the more mainstream university life, I guess, because, we have things like the ITEP, we have SUNTEP, and those are the Indigenous programs. But for me, being in the mainstream, I didn't see as much of that. And so I kind of understood, okay, maybe that's why, maybe that's why our Indigenous folks go to the ITEP is because there's more representation there. And, growing up, I realized that, like, being in leadership in politics, I wondered if it was going to be really difficult for me to do good in my career if my education had some sort of Indigenous on it, right? If it was a program that was made for Indigenous people. And that was something that I thought about because I didn't want people to think that, oh, I had an easier education because I had this or that. It was like, I'm going to show you that we can do it because we all are. We all are capable of doing this. And there's some really great things happening, at the university, and there is a lot of good resources there. They have a lot of cultural coordinators that even offer things like ceremony at the university. And I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that you could do that at the university. And I was actually talking to the coordinator herself, and she said, this is really hard to do this, at the university. She's like, because we're not used to bringing our culture into these spaces. We go back to our homelands for that, or we go back to our communities to do these practices. And she's like, but for the ones that don't have access to that, we're going to bring it to them. And I was like, that's what we need, like we're building more opportunity for them. We're going to bring the ceremony here. If we can't bring the ceremony, if we can't bring you out to the ceremony, we're going to bring the ceremony to you.
That's an awesome way to put that. Well, I'm glad to see that they're doing that in school or in schools. I obviously that's U of S, eh? So that's pretty awesome. That's really awesome to see. I also I hear your sentiment too about if there is Indigenous attached to your education, almost feeling less than some people out in the professional world, right? But there's I say this to a lot of people all the time, and it's funny because myself, like I have like no business doing what I do a lot of times. Like just my whole life, my whole career cycle has just been this crazy thing of just opportunities and me being I know brave enough or dumb enough to take them and jump at them and ending up where I end up and being able to do what I do and in the rooms I'm in half the time. But with all that being said, it's like you just got to take those jumps, right? And like get these people to do that and like live outside of that. But again, it's so hard, and you mentioned it too with a lot of that shame and past that is a lot of it I think is ingrained in our DNA even, and then obviously with the things we hear growing up with our parents and their parents, like it's really hard just to get out of that shell, right? And a lot of I mean, you see just so many shy youths. I could only imagine, right? Because you're shining bright when you're talking to all these people and putting yourself out there, and even being on this podcast, putting yourself out there. And there's so many that just go into that shell, right? And just kind of shut themselves off from everything and don't want to be seen, don't want to be heard, even though they have that gift, they have that light that they can put out there. And it's a shame. And I think what you're doing, especially at school and just with everything that you're doing politics wise, it's hopefully, even if it changes one, two lives. I mean, as cliche as that sounds, it's giving those little girls that opportunity, right? To, hey, I want to be like her. I can do this. I can do what she's doing. And hopefully if they learn that at the age of, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, by the time they're your age, it's like, oh yeah, they're just on a full path. You're kind of leading the charge or breaking that ground, right? So it's pretty awesome to see and just hear you talk about all this. It's funny because I had a big list of questions. A lot of my guests are doing this. I feel like everyone's looking at my screens, but you're kind of nailing off every question I have that I did. But I want to lighten it up a little bit or get more into yourself. Like with all of that being said, for the last however long it's been, like what do you do for balance? Like, I mean, you talked about it. You're 19. Like I said, when I was 19, I was like didn't even know where I was half the time, let alone trying to talk to Assembly of the First Nations and FSIN and going to university and things like that. So what do you do like personally for that balance?
Hmm. Well, as my mom always says, you can't pour from an empty cup, my girl. And she'll always remind me when I get a little too quiet. Um, well, lately, actually coming into the new year, I kind of had to lay everything out, um, because I was really overwhelmed. I was trying to balance university, being a full-time student, and I realized that it was really hard for me to say no. It's really hard for me to say no. I always think that I have time and I'm trying to make these commitments, and I don't want to um say no to anyone because I feel like experience for me is so important, um to like guide me on like these other crazy adventures that I'll go on. um But it's interesting because I actually work with a business that nourishes all aspects of self through the medicine wheel. And it's an Indigenous female owned business called Nawa Wellness. And so it's really important that we balance our medicine wheels and remember that we have to take care of ourselves, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually. And so for me, when I was setting everything down into the new year, I was like, how am I going to maintain these elected positions? Because right now I'm in the FSIN, I'm elected to the AFN Council, I'm working with the AFN's Women's Council, and I'm trying to do business. I'm learning more about business, and I love that. And I have some film stuff going on, and it's like I have a lot of doors opening for me through these opportunities, but I tend to burn out, and when I burn out hard. And so sometimes for me to not get to that point so I don't burn out, I'll just keep going and I'll keep myself busy, I'll keep myself distracted so I don't have to worry about anything else, so I don't have to deal with the things that are a little too difficult, the things that I don't really like to talk about. And I'll keep myself busy. And I realized that was my problem. I was like, that's why I'm committing myself to so many things, is because I don't want to slow down, because then I gotta deal with this I gotta face it. And with Newa and the crew, with my roommates, we practice that. We do things, for our own health, for our own self care. And one of the first things on my list was, okay, where are my priorities? Where am I going to be putting my energy? Because I volunteer every single day, I volunteer every single day. And maybe I need to cut back. Maybe I need to slow down because I'm tired, I'm tired. And so I became a part-time student. I cut my studies in half. And I was like, I want to focus on my elected positions. I want to do well in school, so I need to make sure that I only have a couple classes. But something that I also do to like unwind and then just, balance myself is going back to ceremony. And I've been slowly learning about that more, about myself. And I always thought like, I never had culture. I would tell myself that. I would tell myself that I never had culture. And I was dismissing that I did. I did. And I did have access to it. It was just a matter of reaching out, and I found that that is a place where, I can just be vulnerable and I can just be myself, and I can talk about, the things, about the good things, and I can talk about the bad things and express the way that I'm feeling. And that's something, for a lot of people is we're constantly thinking about everything, even when I'm trying to sleep, sometimes I'm thinking about, okay, what do I got to do tomorrow? Or, oh, I forgot to do this today. And it's like, when do you slow down? When do you take that time for yourself to just not think about any of that and just be present with yourself? And so something that I recently took up was yoga. And my mom would always try to practice yoga with me. And I never liked it. I was like, oh, this is an older person thing. But no, I was wrong. I was wrong because I love yoga and it allows me to just be still in the moment, focus on my breathing. And that's what I need to do for myself. I need to just listen to what my body's trying to tell me. My body's trying to tell me to slow down. Okay, put the phone away. Let's do 5 minutes of meditation. And so every single day when I wake up and I make my bed, I smudge and I sit down on my bed and I'll do meditation and I'll do box breathing, for 5 minutes. And then I'll just say, a couple things, some affirmations to myself, show some gratitude, especially when I'm in the mirror. Hey, when I'm in the mirror doing my hair, I'll be like, oh, my hair is so beautiful. My hair protects me. My hair gives me strength. And so what you're doing is you're giving yourself that love that everyone longs for, right? And besides that, like the physical activity, I try to play sports sometimes. Playing soccer and staying active, physically healthy. Hey, that's a really big one for me. And working out and trying to keep that and set that as a routine. But even that, like, that was something that I used to do all the time. I was working out every day, and then I suddenly stopped, and it's always really hard to get back into it. And it was really hard for me to step back into the gym and get into that routine again. But for us, we have to remember that if we want to find a balance, we have to remember that the balance isn't just, doing those physical things. It's the emotional, it's the spiritual, it's the mental. And so it's important to journal. It's important to go outside and spend time out in the land, out with the nature, just even by yourself, even just, taking time for yourself to get out there and distance yourself away from technology, from social media. And because I think for myself too, like, it's affected me greatly. And for my generation, for our young people, that's become, normal. It's like we spend most of our days on our phones nowadays. We can't even talk to our young people without them wanting to go on their phone, without them taking Snapchats of you without knowing, and going through TikTok. And it's made it really difficult for us to even have conversations with each other. And it's not even our young people. Even for myself, coming out of the pandemic, it was like, I don't even know if I can speak anymore. I don't even know if I can speak in front of big crowds because I just feel like I have social anxiety. And once I addressed that, once I was like, I do, because we forgot how to interact with one another. Because nowadays we don't phone call each other. We don't, we rather text each other instead of talking on the phone. And so I think that's what created like a lot of challenges for myself too, was the phone, was getting away from that. And even that is hard to do because it's an addiction, right? And for our young people, it's even created like a lot of barriers. And it's scary because I think sometimes when I'm scrolling, through these social media platforms, I'll see, young girls, and it's like, wow, that's crazy. Like, they seem so mature for their age. It's like they're growing up so quickly based off what they're seeing on social media, and you have access to anything on there. you can put anything on the media, and once it's on there, it's not going anywhere. Even if you delete it, it could still be saved somewhere, and it's scary. Like, when I have kids, I'm telling you, you ain't getting a phone till you're 16. And I mean that because it's forcing our young people to grow up way too quickly, and they're saying things on there that they shouldn't be saying. And it's even scary for me because there's a lot of false information that can be shared on there. And even TikTok, it's such a dangerous platform. And sometimes when I'm on there, like, some things really hit me and really bother me, and then I think about it and I actually believe that that's true, or that, and then it makes me think about myself, and then it has me questioning the things that I'm doing when I shouldn't even think about that, because I'm already aware of what I'm doing. I already know that what I'm doing is good, or I'm feeling good, and then because I saw one little post or one little story, it was like, now I don't feel good. And I know that's happening to a lot of our younger people. Hey, is like what they're seeing on social media is affecting their relationships with other people. It's affecting their relationship with themselves. And these are things that, like, we need to, like, address. These are things that we need to talk about, because even for, like, our parents out there, like, phones are so normal. It's just like sometimes we just need to take that time and put it away and just listen to each other and share good stories and tell good stories, because that's the way that we're gonna learn. That's how our people learn.
Oh man, you nailed so many things in that, and I feel the exact same way. But I'm still that person too that, like, I'll go scrolling, catch myself, and be like, "What am I doing? I know better," and then I'll, like, set
Guilty.
it down, and
Yeah.
then still feel like I'm jonesing for my phone again. I'm like, yeah, there's something wrong here. But you're right, absolutely right with a lot of that, and it sucks because there's so much stuff on there that we see. Typically we're only seeing people's highlight reels, or like all, most of natives, it's always all their business too is getting aired out on there too. But it's just like, it's, yeah, it's such a fake world, right? And then most of us, you go back to your real life and you're like, oh wow, this is really dull, this is boring, like it doesn't look exciting like everyone else's life. And it's just a downward spiral from there, right? So these youth, it's just like you don't stand a chance after you're watching some of that stuff. So it's it's pretty tough, and there's really no, like, I haven't met anyone really with a good fix around it yet. um Obviously you try to keep your kids as sheltered. Like, I'm fortunate because I have a 6 year old and a 6 month year old, right? So I or 6 month old, 6 month year old. But even the 6 year old, right? Like, he has his own computer, like he plays games on his computer, he watches YouTube. Like, it's, as much as you want to try to do all these things and keep them sheltered, it's to a point, right? And it's just like, oh, where does it end? So it's a tough one, and that one can go on for days for sure. But I just want a couple more for you, and then I'll leave you be. But um it was funny, one of my questions was going to be like, what are you grateful for? But you nailed it. I like that. When you're in the mirror work is some of the best work, eh? Standing in there, and it's pretty deadly. And then affirmations and smudge, you nailed all that, and that's awesome. And it's these little things, right? They don't take a lot of time for the first little while till you get your routine going. It's a little bit, but most mornings, my son and I, after we mess around downstairs first thing, then we'll smudge and talk to each other about what we're want to set up for the day and what we're grateful for and things like that. So it takes a little
Yeah.
bit to initiate that change, but once it's there, it's pretty easy.
That's another thing, though. Like, for a lot of people, it's like, oh, I have to go out of my way and do that. But for me, like, I don't have time to do that. I'll do it in the mirror. I'm brushing my teeth, and I'm thinking about this already. I'm like, I'm grateful, for this, and I'm grateful for another day. It's already become a routine because you're already doing your hair, you're already brushing your teeth, you're already getting dressed, and you know what I mean? It just, if you're on a drive, like, that's a perfect time to do it. And for me too, it's like, if we can scroll on our phone for 20 minutes, then we can do some work for ourselves for 20 minutes. That's another thing. Or you're laying in bed anyways, you're going to bed, so you might as well, like, do a couple of breaths. Well, that's how I look at it, right? Like, can't make an excuse. I can't anyways. But I am guilty. I am guilty for the phone thing.
No, I understand that 100%. I do understand that. Um, so for Haley, what's like what are these future goals? What's all this working towards? Like what are your aspirations for work? What does a career look like for you right now? I know pivot all the time, but right now what do you have your kind of target set at?
My target, my visions, sustainability. I want sustainability, and I'm looking forward to like a really big transition for our people, because right now the work that I'm doing, I'm also encouraging and building more young leaders out there. And so I've been, reaching out and building more networks with young people, and, creating and putting more like, what's the word? I guess I'm giving them, an opportunity to seek, their dreams and their goals in their life. And that's a really big one for me, is giving our young people more opportunity. And so what I really like to do is I like to start things and I like to hand them off. And so once I have it up and running, because that's one of the hardest things to do, is start it, and then the rest is history. The rest is all for the books. Um, but looking to my future, like, I have had some exciting things coming up, a lot of solutions for our young people, and a lot of important discussions that have been happening about preventing, like things like drugs and alcohol, and gang affiliation. And a lot of that has been doing the work, and bringing that back to my local community, bringing it back to just the community, and reaching out to the ones that are affected, around me. And a lot of this has come through my work, with FSIN and with AFN. And I think it's also inspiring me to create my own association, to create my own, council of superstars, to drive these things, to drive some of the issues that our young people are facing, and to talk about this. But more importantly, it's building those relationships again, and making our young people feel comfortable to share the things that they're going through, right? Because it's different for everyone. The things that I'm going through are way different than, what some other individuals going through way across the nation, So um, and I've done some really exciting things the past year. I know we just got into the new year. I got into some filming, and so that was a really big thing for me. I always wanted to do that, and it was really exciting, and I'm trying to help build a business right now with Nawa Wellness, and pushing, Indigenous, and supporting Indigenous business owners, because that's a big industry. And I think a lot of our people are just young entrepreneurs, just really trying to create something that is going to build a life for them. And yeah, it just, there's so many things like going on, like, but a lot of it is behind the scenes. And so for me, it's kind of hard to talk about, because a lot of it is, I do it and then you'll hear about it later, and it's like, yeah, that's what I've been working on. That's what I've been doing. But yeah, so there's, I don't know, some aspirations. Is that
Well, no,
what
that's
else you
good. Well, a
wanted
little
to?
bit of aspirations too, but I think you got that in
Okay.
there. That's deadly. Like leave that. You do your work, and we'll see all the fruits of that. That's pretty awesome, and I really like that. Well, like I say, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So, where can people find more information about you, and what's the best way to contact you if people want to reach out?
Yeah, so one of the ways that people usually contact me is through the Federation Sovereign Indigenous Nations. I work under the office of Third Vice Chief Ali Bear, but I also have my social media platforms. I have Instagram and Facebook. You can find me at Hailey Rose. And yeah, Or you can come knocking on my door.
Yeah, right by the casino. It's okay. Uh, no, that's deadly. Well, again, I really appreciate your time and thank you for this. You got some great insights, and it's awesome hearing from some of the younger voices, and it's cool to have some fresh ideas out there. So I really appreciate this. Thank you, Haley.
Of course, and thank you for inviting and listening to me today.